He had never once waited for anything in his life. Not a table, not a contract, not a verdict. And yet, on a Tuesday evening in late November, Rowan Callister stood at the entrance of Meridian's private dining floor and waited. Not by choice. The reservation had been made under a shell company that owned a shell company that owned nothing at all, because men like Callister did not put their names on things that could be traced. The matron knew this. Everyone on that floor knew this. They also knew that the man in the charcoal suit, with the jaw carved from something colder than stone, did not appreciate being told that his table was not yet ready. 2 minutes, the maitre d' had said, with the kind of smile people practiced in mirrors when they were terrified. Callister had said nothing. He had simply looked at the man, and that had been enough. He was 41 years old, built like someone who had once done terrible things with his hands and had never stopped being capable of them. His hair was dark, cut close at the sides, and there was a single pale scar that ran through his left eyebrow. The kind of mark that polite people did not ask about. He ran the Callister network across 4 states and had arrangements in 7 others. Politicians returned his calls before they returned their wives. Federal prosecutors had opened and quietly closed 3 separate investigations into his organization in the past 6 years. He had not bribed them. He had simply made it known, through channels that could never be named in a courtroom, that certain information about certain people would remain buried so long as certain decisions continued to be made. The city feared him quietly. That was the way he preferred it. His 2 men, Bernard and a younger one everyone called Pike, stood at a respectful distance near the elevators, watching the room the way trained dogs watch a yard. Callister had told them once, years ago, that the job was not to look dangerous. The job was to look inevitable. They had not forgotten. The dining floor at Meridian seated 32 people and had a 3-month wait list. Tonight it held 11. Most of them moneyed and cautious, and aware enough to keep their eyes pointed away from the corner table that had been cleared, reset, and cleared again while the maitre d' sweated through his collar. It was during this second clearing that she appeared. Callister noticed her the way he noticed most things. Not because she announced herself, but because something in the room shifted when she moved through it, the way air shifts before a weather change that hasn't arrived yet. She came from the service corridor, not the main floor, carrying a water pitcher in one hand and a folded cloth over her forearm. And she walked like someone who had learned to take up less space than she actually occupied. Her eyes were down. Her movements were deliberate and quiet. She was perhaps 30, with dark hair pulled back at the nape of her neck and a frame that Meridian's fitted black uniform had clearly not been designed for. Full and rounded at the hip, substantial across the shoulder, soft in the way that made the tailored fabric strain slightly at the buttons. She was not what this room was built to display. She did not look up as she approached the corner table. He watched her straighten the water glass. His man had apparently moved. She did it without thinking, with the automatic precision of someone who had reset this table 1,000 times and trusted her own hands more than she trusted the last person who'd touched it. "You," Callister said. It was not loud. It did not need to be. She looked up. Her eyes were the color of dark amber, something warm underneath the glass, and for exactly 2 seconds, she went very still. Then something closed behind them, and she said, in a voice that was professionally neutral, in a way that suggested it had been worked at, "Yes, sir. I've been standing at that entrance for 4 minutes." "I'm aware," she said. "Your table had a settings issue. It's been corrected." Callister tilted his head. He had expected an apology, something reflexive and placating. He had not expected "I'm aware," delivered like a small stone placed carefully on a table. "Is it standard," he said, "for guests to stand while staff resolve settings issues?" "No," she said. "We typically seat guests immediately. You were held at the entrance by the front-of-house team." A pause. "I don't manage the front-of-house team." He looked at her for a moment. She did not look away. Most people looked away. "And who are you?" he asked. "Delia Cole," she said. "I'll be your service lead tonight." He pulled out his chair and sat, and she moved to fill his water glass without being asked. And for a few seconds, there was nothing in the room but the sound of water and the distant murmur of other conversations. Then his second phone buzzed twice in his breast pocket, the one with no carrier name on the screen, and he glanced at it and set it face down on the table, and something shifted behind his eyes. "The tasting menu," he said. "All of it. No substitutions." "Of course." She was already moving to go. "How long?" She turned back. "Between courses. Total." She considered this without performing the consideration. "Depending on the kitchen's pace tonight, approximately 90 minutes. Could be 10 less if you'd prefer I ask them to move faster. I'd prefer you not have to ask." "Then I won't," she said, and left. Bernard materialized at his elbow approximately 12 seconds later. "You want me to find out who she is?" "I know who she is," Callister said. "Her name is on her badge." "I mean, I know what you mean." He picked up the water glass. "Sit down, Bernard." The first course arrived 8 minutes later, brought by a different server, younger, sharper uniform. Clearly, the one Meridian kept visible for tables like this. But it was Delia who came behind him to adjust the placement, and it was Delia who said, without inflection, "The amuse-bouche tonight is a compressed watermelon with prosciutto and a black pepper creme. The chef asks that guests finish it in one bite if possible." "Does the chef often make requests of his guests?" Callister asked. "Only when it's worth it," she said. She was gone before he decided whether he was annoyed. He ate the watermelon. It was, in fact, worth it. The second course came and went. The third course, a dry-aged beef tartare with a quail egg that had been handled with a level of care that suggested someone in that kitchen understood the difference between technique and performance, appeared at the table with only Delia behind it, the junior server apparently absorbed elsewhere. She set it down. She stepped back. She was about to leave when Callister said, "You've been watching the kitchen timing." She stopped. "It's my job." "You've also been watching my phone." "A beat." "I've been watching the table," she said carefully. "You've checked that phone 4 times in the past 40 minutes. That tells me the 90-minute timeline may be a problem." Callister looked at her steadily. And I already told the kitchen to run 15 minutes faster." A pause. "If that was presumptuous, I apologize." He said nothing. She said nothing. Then, "It wasn't presumptuous," he said. "How did you know to do that?" "The second time you checked the phone," she said. "You didn't put it down immediately. The first time, you did. That's a different kind of urgency." She adjusted the placement of his bread plate by approximately 3 millimeters for no reason that was visible to him. "I pay attention to what I can control and work around what I can't. The kitchen timing I can control." He studied her face. There was nothing in it that looked like it was trying to impress him. There was nothing that looked like it was trying not to impress him either. It was just accurate. A woman describing her own method because she had been asked. "Sit down," he said. She blinked. The first genuine crack in the professional surface. "I'm sorry." "Not for long. Sit down, Mr. Callister," she said. "I'm working. I know you're working. I'm asking you to stop for 60 seconds. He pulled out the chair across from him with one foot, not moving his hands from the table. 60 seconds. Then you can go back to controlling the kitchen timing." She looked at the chair. She looked at him. She looked at the chair again. She sat down, not like someone who was being compliant, like someone who had made a calculation and come out on a specific side of it. "You've worked here how long?" he asked. 14 months. "Before this, financial sector," she said. 4 years. He waited. "I left," she said, in a tone that communicated clearly that this was all she would be saying about that. "Why here?" She considered this. "Because in finance, the thing you're moving around is abstract. Numbers on screens. Here, I can see what I'm managing. I can touch it. I can fix it in real time. She glanced at his tartar. You should eat that. The egg will set if it sits. He looked down at the dish and then back at her. You just told me what to do, he said. I told you what was happening to your food, she said. What you do about it is your business. He picked up his fork. She stood, smoothed her apron. The gesture of someone returning to a version of herself she was more comfortable in, and said, I'll have the fourth course up in 12 minutes, and walked back toward the service corridor without looking back. Pike appeared at Callister's shoulder the moment she was gone. Should I know? Callister said. You don't know what I was going to say. Whatever it was, Callister said, no. The fourth course, the fifth, the sixth, which was a duck confit that had been resting long enough to be exactly what it needed to be, served with a reduction that tasted like someone's grandmother's kitchen, and a Michelin star had reached some kind of agreement. Throughout all of it, Delia moved through the floor the way a current moves through water. Felt rather than seen, purposeful in a way that made it look like the room was organizing itself around her rather than the other way around. He watched her manage a spillage at a neighboring table without being summoned and without making the couple involved feel as though they'd been managed. He watched her redirect the junior server twice, with nothing more than a look and a small tilt of her head. He watched her check the temperature on a dessert plate by pressing the back of 2 fingers to its underside for exactly 1 second before nodding, satisfied, and sending it out. She did not look at him unless she was at his table. When she was at his table, she looked at him directly, the way people looked at things they had decided were not frightening. The phone buzzed again at 8:47. He looked at it. He set it down. He looked up and found Delia, standing at the service corridor entrance, watching the floor, and she saw him look at the phone, and then she was gone through the door, and 40 seconds later she reappeared with the 7th course moving faster than the pacing he'd been given. She did not say anything about it. She simply put it down and stepped back, and he understood that she had, again, seen something and acted on it, and had not required acknowledgement or thanks or explanation. It unsettled him. He was not a man who was often unsettled. When the final course had been cleared and the check had been placed, a number he would not look at, because men in his position did not look at checks, he sat for a moment in the quieting room and turned his water glass slowly with one hand, thinking. He called her over with a look. She came. The duck, he said. On the 6th course, the reduction. She waited. It was right, he said. I don't say that often. The kitchen will be glad to hear it. I'm not telling the kitchen. I'm telling you. She looked at him. The amber eyes did something quiet and complicated that he didn't have a name for. Thank you, she said, and she meant it in a way that was not performative, and that was somehow stranger than everything else about the evening. He stood, buttoned his jacket. Bernard and Pike were already moving toward the elevator. Delia, he said. She looked up. I'll be back Thursday. He paused. Same table. I'll make sure it's ready, she said. He nodded once and walked away. He did not look back. He did not need to. Thursday was different. He arrived exactly on time, which was to say 8 minutes before his reservation, because men who arrived exactly at their reservation time were men who had not secured the perimeter first. The table was set. The water glass was already full. The bread had been placed at the temperature at which bread was best eaten. Delia appeared from the service corridor as if she had a clock inside her that tracked arrivals by footfall. Mr. Callister, she said. You remembered, he said. I work here, she said. It's not memory, it's function. He sat down. He looked at her. You wear the same pin, he said. Every shift. Small, silver, left lapel. Something flickered behind the amber eyes. It was my mother's. He filed that away. He did not respond to it, because the information was not his to respond to, but he filed it. Tonight, he said. I have 45 minutes. She nodded. Then I'd suggest the prefix, 3 courses. I'll have the kitchen run concurrent on 2 and 3. You'll be done in 40. She hesitated for exactly 1 second. The risotto is tonight's special. The chef is particularly motivated. I'd take it over the steak. Should I ask why he's particularly motivated? His wife had twins this morning, she said. Men in that condition either fall apart entirely or produce their best work. Chef Laurent is a second-category man. Callister looked at her for a moment. Order for me, he said. She blinked. I'm sorry. You know what's best tonight. Order for me. She stood very still for a moment, and he could see her deciding, not whether she was capable, but whether it was safe to be. Whether being capable in front of him was something that would cost her, something she hadn't budgeted for. Then she said, the risotto, the salmon second, the tart tatin to finish. I'll have it out in 40 minutes. And she moved away, and this time her shoulders were slightly different. Not more confident, exactly, but more settled, like a person who had put something down they'd been carrying too long. He ate the risotto. He had eaten in 41 countries. He had been cooked for by people who had cooked for heads of state. The risotto was the best thing he had eaten in 3 years, and he ate it slowly, which was not something he usually did. And when Dahlia came to clear the plate, she looked at the empty bowl, and then at him, and she almost smiled. She stopped it before it finished. Chef Laurent, Callister said. I'll tell him, she said. I'll tell him, Callister said. Take me back. She stopped. Guests don't. I'm aware of what guests don't do. She looked at him for one long moment, and then she said, follow me, and led him through the service corridor and into the back of the kitchen, which was hot and bright and loud, in a way the dining floor was engineered to prevent, and Chef Laurent was a stout man in his 50s, who looked like he had been crying approximately 30 minutes ago, and had not finished deciding whether he was proud of himself for it. Callister shook his hand and said, the risotto. It was remarkable. Congratulations on your children. Laurent looked at him like a man who had not been spoken to that way in a long time. He said, Merci, monsieur, very quietly, and his voice broke on the second word. Callister nodded once and turned and followed Dahlia back through the corridor. And when they reached the dining floor, she turned to face him, and there was something in her expression that had not been there before. Not softer, exactly. More like a lock that had shifted to a different position. That was kind, she said. It was accurate, he said. Sometimes they're the same thing, she said. He looked at her for a moment. Yes, he said. Sometimes they are. He came back the following Tuesday, then the Thursday after that. It became, without either of them naming it, a pattern. He arrived. The table was ready. She ordered for him on the nights he trusted her judgment, which became most nights. They spoke. Not in the way that service staff spoke to guests, and not in the way that guests spoke to staff, but in the way that two people spoke when they had both decided, independently, that the other person was worth listening to. He learned things in increments. She had studied economics at a state school on a partial scholarship, and had graduated top of her cohort. The financial firm had let her go 18 months into a position that had been described to her as a management track when she was hired, and that had in practice been a permanent holding pattern, a place where people who didn't fit the room's preferred image were kept busy and kept quiet. She had sued. She had lost. She had stopped fighting it and started looking for somewhere the work was visible, and the outcome was immediate. She learned things about him in a different way, not through conversation but through observation, which was how she learned most things. She learned that he took his coffee without sugar, but sometimes stirred it anyway. The habit of a man who used to take sugar and stopped. She learned that he always put his second phone in his left breast pocket and his personal phone in his right jacket pocket, and that the personal phone almost never rang, and when it did, his face did something brief and private that he didn't know she could see from across the floor. She learned that he tipped in cash always exactly 30%, no more and no less, folded to the same size every time. She learned that he watched her. not the way that men in that dining room sometimes watched her, with the reflexive assessment of a person categorizing what they saw and finding it wanting. He watched her the way she watched the floor, strategically, systematically, with genuine attention paid to what was actually happening rather than what he expected to see. It frightened her more than the other kind. She was not a woman who had ever been watched like she was worth watching. She had spent most of her adult life doing the work of being invisible, wearing her hair back, choosing colors that didn't demand attention, standing in a room's margins, because the margins were safer than the center. She had learned to make herself efficient and quiet and easy to overlook. It was a skill like any other, and she had gotten very good at it. Callister did not let her be invisible. He simply refused to treat her as though she was. She was not sure what to do with that. She found out who he was on a Wednesday night, between the end of her shift and a bus that was running late. She sat in the staff break room with her phone and a cup of tea that had gone cold, and she searched the name that had been on his reservation for the past 5 weeks. And what came back was not a LinkedIn page, or a real estate portfolio, or a mention in a quarterly report. What came back was nothing, and the nothing was the shape of something very specific. A man who had been careful to not exist anywhere that could be found. One result, buried in a 6-year-old local news archive, referenced the Callister Group in connection with a waterfront development dispute. The story was 4 paragraphs long. The 4th paragraph mentioned that no comment had been provided and that the company had no public spokesperson. She sat with her cold tea for a long time. Then she put her phone in her bag and took the bus home and spent the night staring at the ceiling, thinking about the way he'd told the chef. His risotto was remarkable, and the way Laurent's voice had broken on Merci, and the way Callister had not seemed surprised that it had. She did not quit. She thought about it, and then she decided not to, for reasons she did not examine too closely. 3 weeks later, on a Tuesday, a man she didn't recognize came in through the main entrance at 8:15 in the evening and was seated at a table 3 positions from Callister's corner. And from the moment he sat down, something in the room felt different in a way Delia couldn't name. He ordered 2 drinks in the time most people ordered 1. He looked at the entrance 4 times in the first 10 minutes. His jacket sat oddly at the right shoulder, in a way that had nothing to do with tailoring. She did not know what it meant. She knew it meant something. She walked to Callister's table and refilled his water glass, which did not need refilling, and she said, very quietly while looking at the middle distance, "The man in the grey jacket. 3rd table from your left. He's been watching the entrance since he sat down. His jacket doesn't fit." Callister did not move. He did not look at the man. He said at the same volume, "How long have you been able to read a room like that?" "Since I was the person everyone looked through," she said. "A beat. Go to the back," he said. "I'm working, Delia." He finally looked at her, and his voice was the same temperature it always was. But something underneath it had shifted. "Go to the back of the kitchen and stay there until I or Bernard comes to get you. Please." It was the please that did it. She had never heard him say it before. It sounded like a word he had to remember existed. She went. She was in the kitchen for 11 minutes. Chef Laurent, who seemed to have decided she was trustworthy based on information she had not provided, did not ask why she was there. He gave her a stool and a cup of coffee and continued what he was doing. It was Bernard who came through the door, not Callister, and he said, "We're ready," and she followed him back out. The man in the grey jacket was gone. So were 2 of the other tables, cleared and reset, the guests presumably escorted out through means she hadn't witnessed. Callister was at his corner table. There was a small cut across the back of his left hand that had not been there when she went to the kitchen. She sat down across from him without being asked. He looked at the table. "You should have that cleaned," she said. "It's fine. It's bleeding. It's..." He looked down at his hand. "Minimally. I have a first aid kit in the back. I have people for this. Your people, she said, are currently standing at the elevator doing whatever your people do after this kind of thing. I'm sitting here. She held out her hand. He looked at her outstretched hand for a moment, as if it was something he had not encountered before and needed to classify. Then he put his hand in hers. She cleaned the cut with the kit she retrieved from the corridor, and he sat very still while she did it, which she suspected was a thing he was doing on purpose. Because it was not a deep cut, and it was not particularly painful, and yet he sat as though he was concentrating on remaining stationary, the way a very large animal sits still when something small and careful is doing something to it. You told me to go to the back, she said, working. Yes, you said please. A pause. I'm aware, you don't say please. I say please. She looked up at him. He looked back at her. Occasionally, he said. She returned to the cut. Why me? You could have had Bernard tell me. Bernard, he said, has a face that frightens people. Your face frightens people. My face, he said, is just a face. Bernard has a face that tells people something bad has already happened. I didn't want you to hear it that way. She pressed the bandage flat against the back of his hand and held it for a moment, which was longer than necessary for adhesion, and neither of them moved. You knew something was wrong before I told you, she said. Yes, and you didn't do anything until I told you. I was waiting, he said, to see if you'd say something. She let go of his hand. She looked at him. Why? He looked at her steadily. Because the way a person decides to act on what they see tells you more about them than what they see. Anyone can notice something. What you do with it, whether you say it, who you say it to, how. He paused. He looked at his bandaged hand. That's character. She was quiet for a moment, she said. It was not an accusation. It was a fact being placed on the table. I've been learning you, he said. There's a difference. What's the difference? A test has a pass or fail, he said. Learning doesn't. She sat with that for a moment. And what have you learned? She asked. He was quiet long enough that she thought he wasn't going to answer. Then he said, that you are the most capable person in any room you walk into, and you have spent years making sure no one could see it. That you make correct decisions faster than anyone I've employed at 3 times your salary. That you are afraid, consistently, of taking up space, and that when you allow yourself to forget to be afraid, you are extraordinary. The word landed in the space between them, and neither of them looked away from it. Delia's throat did something complicated. She had been told many things in her life about what she was. None of them had sounded like that. Mr. Callister, she said. Rowan, he said. She stopped. My name is Rowan, he said. You've known it for 7 weeks. You've been using my last name like a fence. She looked at him. It is a fence, she said. It's a necessary fence. Why? She was quiet for a moment. Because you are not a man who should be without fences. No, he said. I'm not. He reached forward and placed his uninjured hand over hers on the table. Not grasping, not holding, just setting it there with the particular deliberateness of a man who chose every physical gesture like he was signing a document. But I would like, he said, very quietly, to be the one you let decide where the fence is. She looked down at his hand on hers. She looked up at his face. He was not asking her for anything she could put a name to. He was not asking her to be smaller or quieter or more. He was asking, she understood, for exactly what she was. The woman who watched the room, who read the kitchen timing in a glance, who noticed a jacket that didn't fit, and said so to the one person in the room who needed to know. Asking for her to keep being that, but close to him, where he could see it. Rowan, she said. It sounded like an answer. He didn't smile. He was not a man who smiled easily, and she had come to understand that about him the way she'd come to understand everything else, by watching, carefully, over time. But something in his face settled, the way a city settles after a long rain, quieter and cleaner in the bones. He took his hand back. He straightened in his chair. He looked at the table as if remembering where he was. "The tart tatin," he said. She blinked. "It's been sitting for 20 minutes. Can it be saved?" She stood. She smoothed her apron. She looked at him with something in her face that was not quite a smile, but was in the same neighborhood, occupying a chair nearby, getting comfortable. "Leave it to me," she said, and she went to go fix it, which she did, because she fixed things, and that was what she was for. Not in the way she had once believed, the kind of useful that was disposable, but in the way that mattered, the kind that was chosen, returned to irreplaceable in all the specific ways that could not be replicated or replaced, or walked past ever again.